guys! So the download of today is taken from Psalms 31, the whole chapter actually. It's a chapter that was written by David at a time where he was in distress and he was crying out to God. And it starts off in verse 1, "In thee, O Lord, do I put my trust. Let me never be ashamed. Deliver me in thy righteousness." The first thing that struck me is that he's talking directly to God. It speaks of him having a personal relationship with God being the source that, or the place that he goes to when he's in distress, that he goes to for answers. And he's saying, I'm putting my trust in you. And that really speaks of an act of will. It's a voluntary action that he's taking to to choose God as his refuge, God as the place where he puts his faith in and hopes that God will deliver him out of the situation he's in. And he then goes on to say, let me never be ashamed. And really what he's trying to say, or what that speaks to me of, is David saying, never let my expectation of you being good and seeing your goodness in the situation, you coming through for me, let that never be put to shame. And it just really speaks of David knowing God, knowing his character, knowing that he's a good God, knowing that he's sovereign, knowing that he has foreknowledge and he's able to handle any situation and nothing is impossible for God. With David knowing all that, he's almost like then putting that back on God and saying, God, I know you're good, I know I can trust you, let me not be put to shame. Like, let my expectation of your goodness showing up, you showing up and delivering me from this situation, you being good in this situation, your mercy in this situation, let my expectation of that never be disappointed. And then he goes on to say, deliver me in thy righteousness. And righteousness really speaks of being in right living or morally right. It's only God that is the person that's never sinned. God is the only person that is inherently righteous and he doesn't know any other way. He's morally right. Our righteousness we only get because he sent his son to die for us, so that would bring us back into right living with him. But he's righteous, that's who he is, that's part of the essence of him. There's no sin in him, he's the only one without sin. And really David is just saying, like, hey God, I am choosing to put my trust, I'm choosing to take refuge in you. Don't let this choice, don't let my trust, don't let my expectation that you will show up for me, that you will bring me through the situation, because you are a good God, because you are morally right, don't let that expectation be disappointed. And I mean, if that isn't powerful enough on its own, then the chapter then continues. And verse 5, I think it's interesting. He says, into my hand I commit my spirit, which reminded me of what Jesus similarly said on the cross, when again there was a time where he was on the cross and he obviously took on the sin, the shame, everything in the world, and that was part of God's plan for humanity's freedom. And there's a moment where Jesus says, kind of like, take this cup away from me, it's a lot, I don't want to do it, but not my will but yours. And then he goes on to say on the cross, into thy hands I commit my spirit. And it just reminded me of that even Jesus, similarly, he was in a situation where he was going through something, it was a distressful time, it was a lot, but in the end he was able to say, like, look, not your will, not my will, but God, your will. And my will is your will, and I'm just committing that into your hands, which I thought was interesting. And then if we go down, we read more, and David is again just talking about his troubles, asking God to have mercy on him, talking to God about his grief, his sin, his iniquity, how he is with his enemies, how he's feeling. And then he goes on to say, but I trusted in thee, O Lord, I said, thou art my God. And it's so true that actually with all of this, it's like with every problem that we go through, it's not just about having trust in God, it's knowing that God, who is sovereign, who knows the end from the beginning, who it says will never give us anything more than we can bear, he is not just a God, a random figure, he's our God, and we can get to know him personally, and in a similar way to David, have a personal relationship. And then again, it's interesting because then David then switches from praying and really crying out to God to then declaring God's goodness. In verse 19 he says, how great is your goodness which you've laid up for them that fear thee. And he then says, blessed be the Lord, for he has shown me marvellous kindness in a strong city. And then interestingly, he then towards the end of the chapter, verse 22 onwards, he switches, or verse 23 onwards, the tense switches. So rather than him talking directly to God, he's then talking to us, to the reader, and he says, "Oh, love the Lord, all you his saints, for the Lord preserves the faithful and plentifully rewards the proud doer. Be of good courage, and he will strengthen your heart, all you that hope on the Lord." And it's interesting because in the same chapter, he goes from being like, "God, I'm really trying to trust you. I really believe you can come through for me. This is my situation, but I'm still going to trust in you. And I'm going to worship you. How great is your goodness. God, you're blessed. Blessed is the Lord." And then he's saying that actually, it's almost like then he goes from really crying out to God for mercy to being like, guys, you need to love the Lord. You need to be of good courage. God is going to strengthen your heart. And it really just says that David was able to go from suffering to then giving his testimony of how he saw God's goodness, to then imploring other people to, in the same way, trusting God, take courage in God, knowing that God will strengthen your heart if we hope on him, if we wait on him, if we trust him. So I think that's just amazing, and it's just a reminder that no matter what we're going through, no matter what I'm going through, no matter what you're going through, you can trust in God, you can put your hope in him, you can love on him knowing that he will strengthen your heart, he will not put you to shame, and that expectation that we have, that you have, of seeing God's goodness in your life, seeing God's goodness in the situation, will not be disappointed. So have a good day, and I'll see you tomorrow.